Have you ever felt that strange chill when the house is in absolute silence, as if the echo of your own thoughts were too loud to bear?
You're afraid to turn off the background noise because you sense that the moment you do, you'll hear something you've been trying to ignore your entire life. Your own inner voice. The void. That void you can't fill with anyone else, no matter how many times you try. Most people flee from that moment in terror, as if solitude were a monster waiting to devour them. But Schopenhauer saw something very different. For him, that same terrifying silence was a gift. The true test of your mind is not how well you move in society, but what happens when you close the door and there's no one left but you. That's where your strength is measured. Are you capable of surviving your own company? Think about this. When you're alone, there are no masks, no ornaments, no applause. And that's frightening, because without the noise of others' approval, you discover that maybe you're not as interesting as you thought, or that the cracks you covered with pretty words are wider open than you imagined. Solitude strips you bare, and it does so relentlessly. But it is also in that very tearing that real intelligence appears. Schopenhauer believed that the brightest minds didn't seek refuge in crowds because they understood that the crowd always demands conformity. And conformity kills originality. There's something unsettling in all this. What if the reason you can't stand being alone isn't that you lack company, but that you lack character? What if what you fear most isn't solitude, but the brutal freedom of thinking without chains? Intelligent people don't need to escape themselves because their minds are vast, fertile, and dangerous at the same time. There they find ideas that the rest would never understand because they're too busy filling silences with trivial conversations. Picture it. In an empty room, with no witnesses, no social scripts, you and your thoughts face to face. For some, that's hell. For others, it's the origin of everything that truly matters. That is where creativity is born, where originality sprouts, where those visions that change the world are forged. Not at parties, not in groups, not in endless discussions, but in the penumbra of solitude, where each thought resounds like thunder. Society will always push you to believe that you need to be surrounded, that the value of your life is measured by how many people surround you or how many opinions validate you. But look closely. The crowd rarely creates anything new. The crowd repeats, imitates, copies. Those who dare to step aside, those who prefer isolation, are the ones who end up discovering something no one else had seen before. And of course, that makes people uncomfortable, because every solitary genius is a painful reminder to those who only know how to live on the surface. The disturbing thing is that, deep down, you already know. You know that your best version never appears in the middle of noise, but in those moments when you're trapped inside your own head. The problem is that you don't dare stay there long enough. You escape. You look for the nearest distraction. Because if you remained, you would discover that everything you fear is inside you. And at the same time, everything you desire is also there. That contradiction is unbearable for many, but it is the nourishment of the few who dare to think for themselves. Schopenhauer made it clear. Solitude is not a punishment. It is a privilege reserved for those who possess the mental strength to endure it. The rest will keep running after noise, begging for attention, pleading for recognition, trying to fill a void that cannot be filled from the outside. But the truly intelligent know that the farther they move away from that need, the freer they are. And that freedom, though it hurts, though it frightens, is the fertile ground of wisdom. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. What would happen if you turned everything off? absolutely everything and stayed alone with yourself for days, weeks, months? Would you discover your true power, or would you be shattered by your own echo? The answer to that question changes everything, because that's where the line is drawn between those who live to please the herd and those who live to create. And let me warn you, once you cross that line, there's no turning back. Because once you taste the strength of solitude, company begins to feel like a cheap distraction. You've noticed that the more intelligent someone is, the more selective they become with what they give their mental energy to. That's no coincidence. When you understand the value of your own thought, you discover that the crowd is a silent grinder that wears down and corrupts. Social noise doesn't just steal time, it steals clarity. And here comes the unsettling part. It's not that people want to steal your clarity, it's that they fear you having it. Because a clear mind becomes uncontrollable. A mind that dares to think alone can no longer be manipulated by fear of what others will say, nor by the easy rewards that trap the rest. Solitude is not only the space where creativity is born, it is also the secret laboratory where one learns to listen to what no one else hears. Those who live in crowds get used to canned thoughts, the same phrases, the same opinions, the same recycled emotions over and over again. But the one who steps away begins to perceive the hidden nuances of reality, that which is not shown in public. That's where the sinister emerges, realizing that much of what you thought was authentic in society is nothing more than a twisted reflection of what they expect you to be. And here is where Schopenhauer was sharper than a scalpel. If you seek truth in the crowd, you will find falsehood. Because the collective never rewards originality, it rewards adaptation. The crowd does not applaud what breaks its schemes, but what reinforces them. That is why the great thinkers, the truly lucid, were solitary, not out of contempt for others, but because they knew that the purity of their thought was contaminated with every concession made to the herd. Imagine this scene. Everyone smiles, everyone looks happy, everyone seems to fit in. But beneath that surface lies a shared terror, the fear of not belonging. That is humanity's greatest invisible prison. We are trained to fear isolation more than mediocrity. And yet, the brightest minds understand that isolation is not a sentence. It is a secret door. A door that leads to an inner territory where the rules change, where external voices fade, and only the raw pulse of your own thought remains. There's something almost supernatural in that process. The more time you spend alone, the more layers of lies fall away. It's painful because you discover that much of your life was built on the expectations of others, on borrowed desires. But that pain is proof that you're waking up. And once you wake, you can never sleep again. Society begins to look like a grotesque theater, full of actors repeating scripts they didn't write. And while they kill themselves for fleeting applause, you understand that the real play is written in silence, far from the stage. The most unsettling part of all this is that intelligence, joined with solitude, grants a power that few know how to handle: radical independence. An independence that needs no validation, that asks no permission, that kneels before no one. That kind of freedom is dizzying because it means that if you fall, no one holds you up. But it also means that if you rise, no one can stop you. It is a brutal pact with yourself, to renounce the comfort of belonging in order to embrace the strength of being authentic. And here comes the most disturbing part. The more independent you are, the more uncomfortable you become for others. Not because you harmed them, but because your very existence is a reminder of what they didn't dare to be. chosen solitude becomes a mirror that reflects the dependence of those who don't know how to be alone. And that reflection torments them. That's why they attack, criticize, judge. Not because you are strange, but because your freedom exposes their slavery. Let me ask you something that will unsettle you. What is worse, being alone or living surrounded by people who never truly know you? What is more terrifying, the silence of your room or the eternal noise of empty conversations that mean nothing? Because if you think about it, there is no greater loneliness than the one you feel surrounded by people who don't understand your mind. That is the paradox no one wants to accept. Many prefer false company rather than face the real company of themselves. And that is what separates those who get lost in the crowd from those who manage to transcend. The lesson Schopenhauer left is so uncomfortable that it still unsettles those who dare to read it. Solitude not only strengthens, it also filters. It filters out false friends, false thoughts, false emotions. At first it hurts because it feels like you're losing everything. But over time you discover that the only thing you lost were illusions. What is real, what truly matters, stays with you. And that brutal cleansing is the seed of authenticity. Now tell me, are you ready to endure the truth that appears when all the noise disappears? Because what you discover will not always be pretty, nor easy, nor comfortable. But if you endure it, if you survive that terrifying mirror, then you will have gained the only thing that truly matters: ownership of yourself. And that, believe it or not, is rarer and more valuable than any applause. But there's something even more unsettling that almost no one dares to mention. Solitude changes the way we perceive time. When you're surrounded by noise, days slip away like sand through your fingers. Everything blurs. Nothing leaves a mark. However, when you're alone, every hour weighs as if the clock had become conscious. Time slows, and in that expanded space, the mind begins to dig deeper. Thoughts are revealed there that would never appear in the rush of social life. Silence, when you endure it, becomes a mirror that amplifies who you are and what you fear to be. And that's frightening, because you cannot escape your reflection. What's disturbing is that this experience not only strips your mind bare, it also strips your identity. You begin to realize that much of what you thought you were was nothing more than the sum of others' expectations. Roles you assumed because others expected you to. But in isolation, those roles crumble. And what remains is the most brutal question of all. Who are you really when no one is watching? Most prefer never to face that answer, because they know that behind it there may be nothing. But the few who dare discover that this void is not an abyss, but a canvas. And it is on that canvas where true creation begins. Genuine creativity is not born in conversations, nor in applause, nor in external stimuli. It is born in the intimacy of a mind that dares to wander solitary paths, the inventions that changed history. The ideas that shook entire cultures did not come from halls filled with voices. They were born in closed rooms, in endless nights of reflection, in minds that endured the discomfort of being alone with their thoughts. It is as if solitude were a crucible where the purest ideas are melted, an invisible furnace that hardens what noise never could forge. But here comes another darker revelation. Not everyone can endure that process, because the same solitude that feeds the intelligent destroys the weak. What for some is a fertile field for thought, for others becomes a suffocating desert. It's the difference between one who uses silence as a weapon and one who perceives it as a sentence. And that difference is what marks the boundary between authentic intelligence and mediocrity disguised as sociability. Do you see it? The more you think about it, the clearer it becomes that solitude is not a simple state. It is a test. A psychological test that separates those who dare to face their minds from those who constantly need to anesthetize it. And perhaps that is the deepest key of all. Noise is the drug of the masses. Solitude is the medicine of the wise. But like all medicine, it tastes bitter, it hurts, it's uncomfortable. Only those who withstand the bitterness obtain the cure. Now imagine the future of someone who never dares to be alone. Imagine an entire life defined by what others think, marked by shifting opinions, built on quicksand. That person never knows themselves, never faces themselves, never touches their true essence. And when the end comes, they realize they lived surrounded by people but completely empty. In contrast, the one who embraced solitude carries something indestructible, an identity that depends on no one, a sharp mind that is sufficient unto itself, a freedom that no one can take away. The question is inevitable. Are you willing to go through the pain that discovering yourself truly entails? Because if you do, you will enter a territory where very few dare to walk, a territory where the crowd cannot follow you. And there, among the shadows of silence, you will realize what Schopenhauer always knew. Solitude is not absence, it is absolute presence. The presence of who you are, of what you can create, of what no one but you can ever become. And now that we've made it this far, before we continue, I want to present the following to you. Our book, The Formula of Awakening, is now available. Do you feel like there's something inside you that wants to awaken, but you don't know where to start? Then I invite you to transform your way of thinking, and with it, your way of living. Discover who you can become. Start today. The link to get the ebook is in the first pinned comment of this video. Grab your copy now at a great price. With that said, let's continue with the video. And this is where we reach the most delicate point, the terrain where almost no one dares to look straight. Solitude as teacher. Not as refuge, not as punishment, not as excuse, but as relentless teacher. She tears away everything false, everything superficial, everything you accumulated to fit in. And when nothing remains, when silence devours everything, the only thing left is your naked essence. That which needs no applause, no validation, no crutches. That which does not break even if you lose everything. That which, deep down, is the only truth you have. And perhaps this is the final message no one wants to accept. There is no shortcut, no trick, no manual. There is only one decision. Flee from the void like everyone else, or enter it like the few. The crowd lives anesthetized, distracted, chasing mirages. But the one who embraces solitude finds an invisible edge, a hidden power, a brutal clarity that changes everything. Because a mind capable of being alone is an untamable mind. Think about this. The whole world can turn against you, but if your inner self is with you, you will never be defeated. That is the strength the crowd will never know, because they are too busy protecting themselves from themselves. Solitude is not the end of anything, it is the beginning of everything. And whoever understands that stops being a slave to noise and begins to live as truly free. So now I throw you a challenge. If you've made it this far, I want you to write in the comments this phrase, and only this phrase, "Silence also speaks." I want to see who made it to the end, who dared to walk with me through this darkness that reveals the light. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring with me the most uncomfortable and hidden corners of the human psyche, because what comes after this won't be easier. It will be deeper. And I say goodbye to you in the only way that makes sense. Turn off the noise, let the echo of these words haunt you, and remember, the crowd can forget you in seconds, but what you build in your solitude, that will never be erased. I'll see you on the side where no one dares to look.